In this final installment in the Montana Heritage Tour series, we head north and west across the Continental Divide to visit museums in Whitefish, Libby, and Polson. Our first point of disembarkation was at the Stumptown Historical Society in Whitefish, a railroad town named for a species that predates trout in Whitefish Lake. Jill Evans introduced us to wonderful memorabilia illustrating the community's storied past. We started with the building itself and its connection to the railroad.
Brief history of the building. It's a Tudor style that was built in 1927 by Lewis Hill. He's the same man who built the chalets in Glacier Park. And he's the son of James Hill, who started the Great Northern Railway. In 1970, the Great Northern was bought out by the Burlington Northern, or a merger, whatever that proper term is. And then 20 years after that, in 1990, Burlington Northern decided to tear the building down. And long story short, the Historical Society and the town said no. We bought it for $1, which means the railroad wrote it off their books, basically. And then we spent $850,000 renovating and restoring it. We now own it free and clear. We paid that bill off about 5 years ago. And so in the restoration process, we took a corner of it to create the Whitefish Museum. And that's the story. And now we rent to both Burlington Northern Santa Fe and Amtrak. And we have 2 Amtrak passenger trains a day, one at 7 in the morning and one at 9 at night, east and west respectively. And startlingly, we have a tiny little lobby there, but we put 65,000 passengers through that little lobby last year. So it's a hugely busy passenger service. This is an interesting point. The Amtrak train that runs through is named the Empire Builder, and that was James Hill's nickname. So just a little bit of history there for you. But it's also a very busy freight center. We right now are seeing anywhere from 40 to 50 trains, freight trains a day. Coal, things from China. The railroad that runs between Seattle and New York, you know, Chicago, New York, is actually like a bridge between the oceans. So we see a lot of traffic in this little town. It's still a railroad town. And the Historical Society owns the train station, which is a wonderful small town story. I am the only paid staff, and the rest of everything that's done is done by volunteers. And the biggest thing that we do that the public is aware of is run this wonderful little small town museum, and that's all with volunteers. And as you look around, I hope that you get some snapshots of some of our archival work here. It's all donated. We have no acquisition budget, so it's a love of a small town and the people who help us save the history.
We had to ask Jill, why was Whitefish called Stumptown?
Well, the wording is based on the fact that when small western towns became railroad towns, the trees had to be cut down to plat them. And so the only 2 towns I'm positive of that had the nickname of Stumptown is Whitefish and Portland. There are probably others, but the name kind of stuck when in 1970 our librarian wrote the book that she titled Stumptown to Ski Town. So that's kind of there, it's fun.
Jill told us about Dorothy Johnson, a famous Western author who moved to Whitefish when she was 5.
She loved Whitefish. She grew up here. Her autobiography is entitled When You and I Were Young Whitefish. It's a wonderful story. She is well known for her Western writing. She wrote The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, A Man Called Horse. They're very familiar Western stories. She was an editor in New York and later moved back home to Montana to Missoula, where she worked at the university as a teacher in the journalism department. But it was always, Whitefish was always her town. We actually for some years had Dorothy Johnson days where she would come back and we'd all have a party.
Dorothy passed away in 1987, so the annual parties are no more, but Dorothy's legacy lives on. There's so much to see in this small museum space. Looking at the sundries from the past in a glass case brings to mind the many types and brands of pharmaceutical products on the market today. Another display area highlights the enduring importance of outdoor recreation in this part of the state.
One of the things that people know about a lot is that we have actually a very, very world-class, high-quality ski area. It used to be known as Big Mountain and recently changed the mountain is still Big Mountain, but the resort is called the Whitefish Mountain Resort. If you're a skier, come to Whitefish. Another fun thing in our museum is the story of our golf course, which started out as a WPA work project that was supposed to be an airport, and it magically turned into a golf course. So that's a fun Whitefish story. And then, of course, we're wild about our bulldogs, our sports teams, and our schools. And it's a charming museum. It's enchanting. If you're in Whitefish, you need to come.
We could not leave the Stumptown Historical Society without inquiring into the origins and evolution of the fur-bearing trout. Jill mercifully gives us the Cliff Notes version of the story.
One long, boring winter in Whitefish, which happens, a local taxidermist created a fur-covered fish, whatever the proper term is. Shortly after that, the public relations manager for the Great Northern, and this was way back in the 20th century, maybe in the teens, saw this and went nuts about it and used it, created a postcard and used it to put passengers on the Great Northern, to bring them out, come to Whitefish. So that story continued, and the Historical Society got possession of the fish. As I said, we have no acquisition budget, so it was given to us at some point. And a couple years ago, we had postcards made as well. I ran out of those and contacted a dear friend of mine who's a gifted photographer, just to have her take another picture of the Hickens' famous world. Well, that wasn't good enough for her, so she took a photo of her husband ice fishing, created another fur-bearing fish with rabbit fur, and our local newspaper, which loves our whimsy, came and did a big story on it. We have a ring binder of lots of stories about the fur-bearing fish and those who love and cherish the whimsy of Whitefish with our fish.